Welcome back to the show, everyone. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. Well, our eyes have been peeled on the Charlie Kirk assassination debacle. NATO has been scrambling for a last gasp push for war with Russia following alleged Russian drone incursions into Polish and now Romanian airspace. Operation Eastern Sentry, as it's being called by NATO, is now underway with renewed calls for a no-fly zone and permanent NATO troops in the states surrounding Ukraine. Russia has responded by affirming that it is indeed in a de facto war with NATO and is using joint war games with Belarus to demonstrate its readiness. All of this while the U.S. backs a disastrous Israeli occupation of Gaza and inches towards Venezuela, following another so-called drug boat being taken down by the U.S. Air Force. To discuss all of this and more, joining me today is Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou of the Duran. Welcome back to you both. Good to see you.
Good to see you again, Danny.
Good to see you.
Great. Yeah. Well, how about we begin with the drone incursion developments, which has NATO literally scrambling and figuratively scrambling. Dmitry Medvedev warned these NATO states, in particular Poland, that a no-fly zone over Ukraine and any surrounding NATO state is akin to war with Russia. Now, it's interesting, and Alexander, I want to start with you. There was a curious piece in El Mundo, actually, saying that this alleged drone incursion by Russia demonstrated the pathetic state of NATO, actually, where only 3 of them were supposedly shot down. I'm curious of what your assessment is of this situation, because what they're essentially arguing is that Russia is attacking NATO directly and that there's this huge push now to fortify and escalate NATO incursions deeper and deeper into Europe, a pattern I think we've all been following closely.
Yeah, well, this is a bizarre story, actually, and it gives us a sense not so much about what the Russians are doing, but about the state of paranoia and hysteria and war fighting mania that we're getting in Europe. So around 1920, 21, Russian decoy drones entered Polish airspace. They were unarmed. They are not stealthy. They are not clearly, obviously intended to attack any particular target because they carry no explosives. There's uncertainty as to why that happened. The Russians are saying that the motors of these drones should not have brought them to the place that they were in. There's rumors that this was a mistake, that it was all due to electronic jamming, other claims, which of course I cannot verify and which are beyond verification, that this was something that the Ukrainians staged in some way, which has never been fully explained. But anyway, the Russians say, look, this happened. We accept these are our drones. Let's meet and discuss this. We don't understand what exactly took place here. Let's meet. Let's have a discussion with you in Poland. This is what the Russian Defense Ministry offers. And instead of accepting this proposal, what do? We talk about no-fly zones. We talk about moving our air defenses close to Poland and to Russia, and to expanding them into Ukrainian territory itself. We take extraordinary, disproportionate, escalatory measures. We talk about an attack on Poland by, to repeat again, inert, unarmed decoy drones. We talk about no-fly zones. And of course, that's already provoking a Russian reaction. So an incident which probably has a very simple explanation is being blown out of all proportion as a result of, as I said, of the hysteria and mania and panic that there is in Europe. And you're absolutely correct. El Mundo is absolutely correct. It's all across the British media as well, that Poland and the Netherlands and NATO, with all their armed might, were unable, apparently, to deal with these drones. They were only able to shoot down 3. Most of them just crashed harmlessly onto Polish territory. But if there'd been a serious attack, if there'd been an actual Russian attack, for all the brave talk about no-fly zones and all of that, it looks as if NATO is unprepared.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Alex, your take.
A false flag, pathetic attempt to create a no-fly zone. That's what I think this was all about. A really pathetic attempt to get a no-fly zone. Trump wasn't buying any of it either. I mean, he was asked a dozen times about the drones in Poland, and Trump was basically saying it's all BS. It was obvious it was all BS. I mean, these were foam decoy drones, some of them duct taped together, sitting on top of barns. It was nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here is how Mark Rutte, this Eastern Century military, they're calling it activity, is being framed by, here's General Secretary Mark Rutte.
And today, General Kinkowitz and I are here to announce that NATO is launching Eastern Century to bolster our posture even further along our eastern flank. This military activity will commence in the coming days and will involve a range of assets from allies including Denmark, France, United Kingdom, Germany, and others. In addition to more traditional military capabilities, this effort will also feature elements designed to address the particular challenges associated with the use of drones. Eastern Century will add flexibility and strength to our posture and make clear that as a defensive alliance, we are always ready to defend.
So, Alexander, what exactly is Eastern Century then? And you said it's provoking a Russian response. And what is that?
Well, I don't know what Eastern Century is. I mean, he doesn't really explain that. I would point out that ever since the start of the special military operation, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if you prefer, the NATO has been strengthening in its eastern flank continuously. I mean, one is always hearing about new troop deployments in the Baltic states, in Poland, in Romania. There's been talk about setting up bases in Finland and in Scandinavia, elsewhere in Scandinavia. There's talk about new headquarters being established in Finland, actions being taken to threaten Kaliningrad. So what exactly are we supposed to be doing or intending to do over and beyond all of that? And to the extent that we've done all of that already, well, we've seen the result. We can't even shoot down reconnaissance drones. I mean, it all seems, I mean, it's the kind of windy rhetoric we're getting from NATO leaders, which does absolutely nothing actually to strengthen NATO or its defenses or secure peace in Europe or deter the Russians. All it is actually doing is increasing international tensions and, of course, threats of establishing no-fly zones, which nobody's taking seriously. Nobody really believes that anybody in NATO is seriously going to take on the Russian military in Ukraine or indeed anywhere else. All of that is doing is provoking very strong warnings from Moscow, which, of course, we can then repackage and claim that those are also manifestations of Russian aggression and Russian threat, which will lead to more empty rhetoric from people like Mark Rutte. I mean, this whole thing is, I mean, it is stupid. And Alex is absolutely right in saying that Donald Trump saw right through this. He's clearly not impressed by this affair, and nor should we be.
Yeah, and Alex, we can look at one of these perhaps perceived threats. This was Dmitry Medvedev. Here he says, to the Eastern Minister of Defense came to Kiev threatening, well, hold on, the smaller country, the more quarrelsome and foolish the leaders. The smaller the country, the more quarrelsome and foolish the leaders. The powerful European initiative Eastern Guard also amuses me. This seems to be all that remains of the coalition of the willing. But seriously, the implementation of the provocative idea that Kiev and other fools to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine and the possibility for NATO countries to shoot down our drones will mean only one thing: NATO's war with Russia. Things must be called by their proper name. And Dmitry Peskov also affirmed that Russia is in a de facto war with NATO. What does all this spell then? Because on the one hand, there is a lack of seriousness to NATO's capabilities, but certainly not a lack of seriousness in their continued push to do exactly what Medvedev said, is ignite a war with Russia.
Well, I mean, Peskov is correct in saying that NATO is at war with Russia. I mean, Peskov said in that statement, look, NATO provides the weapons, it provides the logistics, the support, the money, the command, the operation. So yeah, NATO is at war with Russia through Ukraine as the proxy. That's obvious. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. I think Peskov was in a way replying to Sikorsky, the foreign minister of Poland, and what he said a couple of days ago when he said that NATO is not at war with Russia, but Russia is at war with NATO through Ukraine, which was a very bizarre comment for Sikorsky to make. But the entire drone incident is really about money to me at the end of the day. I mean, Mark Rutte, he's the CEO of NATO, and NATO is a business. It's in the war business. It's in the keep Russia out, keep the US in, keep Germany down business, and that's what NATO is doing. And so you really pump up this drone incident, and you make the argument that certain countries need more money from their citizens, that defense budgets need to be pumped up to 4% or 5% or 6% or whatever they're trying to push them at. More money needs to be spent on the military-industrial complex. Europe is behind in drones and drone technology, so we got to issue more contracts for drones and drone manufacturing and stuff like that. And of course, you make the argument for Ursula's EU 150 billion euro defense slush fund, and that's going to be a slush fund that will be based on debt and most likely euro bonds. And so you make that argument for Ursula that the EU and the EU member states have to go into debt or further debt in order to build up their defenses because Russia is launching drones into Poland. So I mean, it's just it's a business, it's a racket. Rutte is CEO of this business, and he's just trying to make money.
Yeah, and Alexander, help us understand why Poland right now is becoming so front and center with in this, given this whole drone, what Alex called a false flag. I mean, when it comes to Sikorsky, this is what comes to mind when he was caught thanking the United States on X, where he quickly deleted this following the 2023 Nord Stream bombing, pipeline bombing. So why Poland? Why is it that Poland right now has become the front and center of a new wave of NATO escalations toward Russia, which, for all intents and purposes, is unserious in capabilities, but serious in terms of the possible implications the further they go?
Well, first of all, on the topic of Sikorsky himself, it is important to remember that he is a dyed-in-the-wool neocon with a very, very long history of being involved in neocon politics, not just in Poland, but in Britain and in the United States as well. And of course, he's the husband of Anne Applebaum, who is a prominent activist and historian and all of those things, who has also been, I think it's fair to say, has the identical views, and who publishes extensively in the United States. So those are Sikorsky's own views. But if we're talking about Poland, there's a number of things to say about Poland. Firstly, it is amongst what were once the Soviet Union's satellite states in Eastern Europe, the economic, demographic, and military giant. It is much bigger than any of the others. It has serious armed forces. It has a martial tradition and all of those things. It has a long history of enmity with Russia. So you can play on all of that. You can argue that Poland is the sort of country that can stand up to the Russians, hold back the Russians, lead the West in its policies in Ukraine, which of course Poland borders, and also lead Western policy in Belarus as well. The problem with that is that this policy is becoming increasingly unpopular in Poland itself. Sikorski is the foreign minister of a government, the government of Donald Tusk, which is becoming more and more unpopular in Poland. This belligerence towards Russia and this confrontational policy towards Russia, despite all of the history of bad relations between Poland and Russia, is alarming people in Poland and is turning them increasingly against the government. And opinion polls show that now a plurality of Poles oppose Ukraine's membership of NATO and oppose Ukraine's membership of the EU and want this relationship between Poland and Ukraine and this assistance that Poland has been giving to Ukraine. They want it ended. And there's recently been a presidential election in Poland, and the new Polish president, Mr. Nawrocki, reflects some of these views. So the reason why Sikorski talks in this belligerent way, the reason why Donald Tusk, the prime minister, also talks in this belligerent way and tries to inflate this issue of the drones, is because they sense the deepening unpopularity of their Ukraine policy, and they're trying to bolster support for it within Poland by amplifying the threat from Russia, which is why they've talked up this topic of the drones. Opinion polls show that in Poland itself, this has cut no ice at all. The people of Poland, who are, by the way, well informed and well educated and have a very good understanding of the situation, have not been impressed by this, and the government's popularity continues to fall. And some opinion polls are suggesting that more Poles blame Ukraine for this incident than they blame Russia.
All right, Alex, your thoughts?
Just a couple of thoughts. Baltic Sentry was referenced by Rutte in that statement. If you let that video run a little bit longer, he talks about Baltic Sentry, which was another NATO initiative, which was put in place to protect the Baltic. So they didn't do a good job with that, did they? Given what happened to Nord Stream. I just want to mention that. And remember that Rutte about a year ago, he said in a speech that his goal is to get more money into NATO, and he recommended that NATO member states cut spending from social services, from pensions, from healthcare, and they allocate that budget to NATO. So, I mean, this is what it's all about. And Rutte said as much about a year ago. He said that's what he wants. He wants the budget of NATO to go up because that's his job.
Yeah, Alexander, where does Ukraine factor into all of this? Because it's curious that we see almost this kind of World War III like rhetoric coming out of Poland and NATO, but really their whole issue has been Ukraine. And at this moment, it seems like things have stagnated a bit in terms of their efforts to make any kind of headway or traction there. Where does it fit into all of this?
Well, Ukraine has been trying to get the West in one form or another directly involved in the war for a very, very long time, basically since it started. And when Peskov said that the conflict in Ukraine is de facto a war by NATO against Russia, that is actually factually true. It's not just that we provide the weapons with which Ukraine fights, but we provide the intelligence, we provide the guidance to the missiles. Some of those missiles are launched deep inside Russia itself, 2014 Russia, what we recognize as Russia. And the New York Times and the London Times have also provided massive information in the last year about the extent to which Ukrainian military plans are drawn up by NATO generals, that Ukrainian forces are effectively commanded by US and British commanders, British generals, that the entire 2023 summer offensive was basically planned in Wiesbaden. So you can see that the Ukrainians have historically had some success with this, and that Peskov, when he talks about a de facto war by NATO against Russia, is actually absolutely right. Now, the problem is that all of this has failed to work up to now. The war has not gone well for Ukraine. We'll no doubt discuss the military situation later in this program, but things are not looking good on Ukraine's front lines. The economic situation in Ukraine is getting worse. And of course, the Ukrainian leadership, President Zelensky, has to contend now with this very unpredictable personality in the White House, Donald Trump, who doesn't provide the steady support for Ukraine that they used to get under the Biden administration. So I don't know that this was a false flag. Perhaps it was, the drone event. But if it was, you can understand why. Because from their point of view, the conflict is not going well. The attempt to involve NATO directly is not going well because Trump doesn't want to do it. So if they can find some way to escalate it further, to create a crisis which will directly involve NATO, well, that might finally redress the problems on the battlefronts. It might force the Russians, or so the calculation is, to some kind of capitulation, which is what the Ukrainians and the Europeans have been asking for. And it is not really difficult to understand. So I think this is what you're getting increasingly from Kiev at the moment. And it explains an awful lot of what Ukraine's role in these events is. And if you're talking about the Europeans, well, of course, for them, the project Ukraine, which, by the way, they now say that we shouldn't use, but I happen to know was what they were used to refer to it amongst themselves. Project Ukraine was their project for defeating Russia, for causing a crisis within Russia. And this is really the reason for the war and why they're so intent on continuing the war.
Yeah. Same question to you, Alex. It does seem that Ukraine is looking more and more desperate, especially the more and more that we see NATO attempt to make these kind of military escalations, despite their relative ineffectiveness.
Yeah, Ukraine is looking desperate, but Europe is looking desperate. The European economies are a big mess. And you know, they want to keep the war going. There's no doubt about it that the EU and most of the EU countries, at least the big three EU countries, definitely want to keep the war going. Germany and France, without a doubt, want to keep the war going. The UK wants to keep the war going. Their economies are crashing. The UK economy is a complete S show. France's debt is the worst in Europe. You know, for them, keeping Project Ukraine going is the most important thing for the leaders of these countries. It keeps them in power. It distracts they believe it distracts the public away from what's happening in their own countries, and it's more than just Ukraine and Zelensky for them. You know, Ukraine for them is their way of keeping the United States and the money flow from the United States continuing to come into Europe. And that's what really matters to the globalist elite. You know, they're globalists. They don't consider themselves to be French or German. They're globalists above all else. And for them, the most important aspect of why they're in the positions they are in is to keep the machine, the globalist machine, moving forward. And that machine depends on U.S. money. Without the United States, the whole thing breaks down. And so Ukraine is their way of committing the United States to Europe and to the globalist agenda. That's what Ukraine is to them. And they don't hide it either. They don't hide the fact that they're happy if Ukraine continues to fight the conflict. For them, it's no problem. They're not going to fight the conflict. Yeah, they talk about coalition of the willing and troops and stuff like that. But even Sikorsky the other day said that no one in Europe wants to face the Russians. He said no one is going to go toe-to-toe with the Russians, he said. Forget about it, even if we have security guarantees. But they definitely want Ukraine to continue to fight the conflict. If Ukraine can continue to fight, and maybe they can outlast Trump, maybe they can last for 2 years or 3 years, outlast Trump, get a new administration in place, then the money can continue to flow into Europe. That's what it's all about for them. They don't care about Ukraine. They just want to see the war continue so that they can figure out a way to either convince Trump to keep the money pouring into Europe or to outlast the Trump administration for a new administration to come in, which will then reverse course on the possibility that Trump may walk away. And that's just a possibility. We don't even know if Trump's going to walk away, but that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and definitely want your comments on this before we move on, which is it does this kind of scenario, the way that NATO, it's almost like theater, the way that it is acting, does it set up a kind of plausible deniability for Trump, which it seems like he's having all kinds of troubles, whether he wants to pull out, as you said, Alex, or not. And this is to you, Alexander. It seems like the conditions for the United States are moving to giving the conflict to Europe almost wholeheartedly, while the U.S., I guess, provides whatever support it can with the distance and space politically to say it's not the U.S.'s war, not Trump's war. Your thoughts, Alexander?
Well, this is what the Americans often say. I mean, what Trump says, what Rubio says, what other U.S. officials sometimes say, that this isn't Trump's war, that this is Biden's war, this is Europe's war, this is Zelensky's war, that it's for the Europeans to take over and to run this war, and that the United States is going to distance themselves from it, and all of that. The trouble they have with this is that because they're not simply saying that we're not going to be involved in this war at all, we're going to be there, but we're going to leave it to the Europeans to just run it in the background whilst we go on with other things. Because the Americans are not prepared to make that clean cut, the result is that every couple of weeks, the Europeans come along, the Ukrainians come along, the people in the United States, like Senator Lindsey Graham, who have not given up at all or in any way with this conflict in Ukraine, they come back and they try again to bring the United States, the administration, the president himself back into play. So you get things like Lindsey Graham's and Richard Blumenthal's sanctions from hell bill. You get the demands from Ukraine for more air defense missiles, the plaintive calls after there's been a Russian missile or drone strike on Kiev. You get the Europeans coming and saying, they need security guarantees from the United States, because without those security guarantees, they can't by themselves carry this burden. They need the Americans to be there to pull the coals out of the fire in case they get into trouble. So the Americans say all this. They talk about leave it to Europe, but they can never quite follow through. And they won't be able to unless they simply and straightforwardly say to the Europeans and to the Ukrainians, look, we've done all we can. We cannot do more. From this point on, you're on your own. Now, no one in the United States, certainly not the president of the United States, Donald Trump, he's never had, well, if you like, the courage or at least the clarity to say that. And until that happens, then he will always, and the United States will always be dragged back in.
Alex, to you.
Yeah, Trump should just say to Lindsey Graham and to the Europeans, we're out, but he can't. I mean, I really don't have that much to add to that. We've been saying from the very beginning that the best move that Trump could have made was on January 21st to have just said, we're out of this war. I'm the president now. This was Biden's conflict. We're done. I'm keeping my campaign promise. That would have been the best thing for him to do, but he didn't. The interesting part about what's happened over the past week is that Keith Kellogg has now pretty much stated that he's the guy that Trump was depending on for the past 6 months when it comes to Ukraine. I mean, he pretty much just came out and said it. We've had meetings in the Oval Office. President Trump would ask me if Russia is winning the war, if Ukraine is losing the war, and he was telling Trump that Russia is losing and Ukraine is winning, and it's obvious that he was getting all his information from Ukraine, from the Ukraine military, from Zelensky. All of the KIA numbers that Trump was repeating in various Truth Social posts came from Keith Kellogg, which was coming from Ukraine as well. Trump decided to put all of his faith and his trust in Kellogg when he became president. That's what he based his Ukraine policy on, instead of taking a different approach, a more rational, a more pragmatic, a more realistic approach, and saying we're out of this thing. He decided to go in with Keith Kellogg. He appointed Keith Kellogg. He's the president of the United States. So I mean, he's the one who sits in the chair. So he appointed Kellogg. He gave him that position. He made him the neutral special envoy to mediate between Russia and Ukraine, and he put his trust in Kellogg, and he listened to Kellogg every step of the way for the past 6 months. And now he's in a freaking mess, and he's trying to get out of this mess while not pissing off the neocons, while still being friends with the Europeans, if that's the way you wanna put it. That's what he's trying to do now. He just can't make a clean break from it, and he's trying to figure out, how can I get out of this without making myself look weak, peace through strength, and all of that nonsense, without having Lindsey Graham and the neocons go against me in DC and in Congress. How do I make it look like I'm not abandoning the Europeans, because that would look bad. The United States abandoning the Europeans, our most trusted allies, our best friends, the Europeans. You can't have that either. So he's trying to figure all this out, and he's trying to maneuver and scheme his way out of this mess that he put himself into because he listened to Keith Kellogg. That was the problem. But he's to blame. He's to blame for it. He appointed him. He listened to him, and now he's in a big time mess. The best thing that Trump could do is to call Kellogg into his office and say, "We're done." That would be a good first step, but he's not going to do that.
All right. Well, I think this is a good time to get to the military situation, Alexander. And I wanted to begin, actually, there's military exercises actually being held by Russia and Belarus. And actually the US, I believe, are observing these. And so during the Zapad 2025 military exercises, the Western mainstream media has been in a panic. There's stories everywhere about things like this, right? The Zircon missile being launched, the hypersonic missile being launched during these exercises. There's also talks, I'm sure you're familiar, Alexander, with the Moscow Times, very anti-Russia publication. But they have also talked about how there's nuclear strike exercises being conducted, simulations being conducted during these exercises. But all of this, Alexander, comes, and I wanted to play this because Alex mentioned the Keith Kellogg talking about how he is the point man on Ukraine. Well, he also had some curious things to say about Russia in terms of the U.S.'s capabilities against it. Here's what he said.
This is Russia. They talk a big game, but I don't think they're I think right now the way the Europeans are standing up, I would be very, very worried if I was a Putin. You know, just a comment. He sometimes rattles his nuclear trigger chain by saying, "Well, we're a nuclear power." I'd remind him, U.S. is too, but so's Britain, so's France, and I'd just throw it right back at him. And I think you're seeing that with the Europeans standing up right now. It's the Europeans' war because it's the Europeans' backyard and they see it. But it's one of those where we had a discussion recently in the Oval where, you know, it goes back to what I said earlier about. I'm sorry to the ladies in here, right? But they were talking about the primacy of the Russian military and how they were, you know, pretty good. And I said to the people in the room, you know, we'd kick their ass. You know, and I mean by that is like, don't.
So very curious, Alexander. I mean, a very irresponsible rhetoric, nonetheless, to be talking about throwing back nuclear capabilities and being able to kick Russia's expletive. But here we are. And so maybe talk about these exercises, Russia's capabilities, the reality of the situation, and in light of Kellogg's words.
Well, first of all, about the exercises. I mean, Zapad 25 is an exercise. I mean, the Russians have been conducting exercises called Zapad. Zapad means west, in the western regions of their country, and of course now in Belarus, which is an allied country. This has been a practice that the Russians have had since well back into the Cold War. I mean, they used to have Zapad exercises in the 1970s, I believe the 1960s. The biggest one of all ever, the biggest military exercise in world history was Zapad 81, which took place in 1981. And I can remember it, by the way. I mean, this particular exercise, Zapad 25, is a big exercise. It involves around 100,000 men, but it is not on the scale of some of the Zapad exercises that have happened before. And given that we are in a period of tension, given that we are getting these kind of belligerent comments like the one we've just heard from Keith Kellogg, it's unsurprising that the Russians are training their forces and are taking steps in Western Russia and Belarus, an allied state, to protect themselves. So I don't think that the exercises themselves are anything to be particularly alarmed about. They've undoubtedly been prepared quite a long time in advance. I don't think that they imply any intention by the Russians to attack the West tomorrow or next week or next month or anything like that. But it does show that the Russians are worried about the situation on their western borders, given that there have been threats, for example, in the Baltic, given that there have been threats towards the Kaliningrad enclave. That is completely unsurprising. Now, let's turn to what Kellogg says. Now, Kellogg talks about how the Americans can kick whatever it is of the Russians, that they can defeat the Russians, that they can wipe the Russians. Well, I mean, the first thing to say is he talks about the United States being a nuclear power. He talks about Britain and France being nuclear powers. Russia is the world's biggest nuclear weapons power. The Russians have enormous nuclear forces, at least comparable in power and sophistication to those of the United States. If we are talking about conventional forces, then Russian conventional forces today dwarf those of Britain and France. I was reading an account in a British military magazine that the British Army, for example, is now down to just 25 operational tanks. Now, the Russians use 25 tanks sometimes in the storming of a single village in Ukraine. I mean, there is no possible comparator if we're talking about conventional military power. And as for the situation in Europe, well, the United States does have enormously powerful armed forces. It has what I think many people would still agree is the world's largest and most powerful fleet. It has the world's most powerful air force, but it is massively outnumbered now in Europe by the Russian army there. And of course, the Russians do have powerful air force and fleet as well. I don't think it helps for General Kellogg to talk in this way, especially given the fact that, if one has to be frank, American military performance in its most recent wars has been nothing to write home about.
Yeah, yeah, Alex, same question to you, or reaction to all of this.
If the United States or NATO actually believed they could defeat Russia in Ukraine, they would have been in Ukraine day one. That's simple. They would have been in there with their boots on the ground, with their air force, with their tanks, with everything they had, and they would have gone to war with Russia and easily defeated Russia if they believed that they could have done that. But they know that they could not have done that, and that's why they set up their proxy. That's simple. So, Kellogg is just talking nonsense. But then again, he's someone who's made four or five trips to Kiev in the past 4 or 5 months. He's getting all of his info from Zelensky. He's way too close to Zelensky and to Ukraine. This guy is not an envoy. He's not a diplomat. He's not an envoy. Trump needs to get rid of this guy, and then maybe, just maybe, he can get to some sort of a negotiated deal and maybe even an end to the conflict. But first, he has to clean house, and he has to get rid of the Kellogg's in his administration.
Yeah, maybe even an actual process instead of one-offs like we saw in Alaska. I wanted to, Alexander, given words like Keith Kellogg's, they're rife with, let's say, fact-free kind of statements and threats. But Russia in these exercises, I'm curious if you could talk about what exactly motivates Russia to develop these advanced missiles, the hypersonic, the Zircon, there's talks of the Oreshnik. I know Belarus is now under that almost like an Oreshnik umbrella, where they're both during these exercises also testing their deployment. So talk about this kind of buildup from Russia's side, Russia's perspective, and what exactly does it say about Russia's capabilities to defend itself? Because I think this is the big issue here, is we see Russia actually developing quite advanced weaponry that likely makes the U.S. in reality, and makes NATO think twice or three times before getting into an actual open conflict with Russia.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, if we're talking about hypersonic missiles, the simple fact is that as of this moment in time, the Russians have them, and we in the West don't. The Russians are far ahead of the West in hypersonic technology. The only other country that can compare with the Russians in hypersonic technology is China, not the United States, not any of the European members of NATO either. And the Russians have developed these capabilities. They've developed hypersonic missiles, in part because it reflects their military doctrines. They are a land power. They're not a sea power. They use missiles as a kind of very long-range artillery. And that means that they focus very, very heavily on missile development. So they develop missiles both for offensive war, missiles that they can use against targets like air bases, like ammunition and warehouse storages and all of that kind of thing. And they also use very advanced missiles for their air defense, which is what they use to counter the superiority or presumed superiority of the West in aircraft. It reflects the geography and the difference in Russian military culture. Now, the point to say is, it doesn't mean that because the Russians have taken this course that we have an advantage over them, or if they were to attack us, that they would necessarily have an advantage over us. It just means that they look to different types of technological solutions from the ones that we have. And I get to say it. I think if you're looking at the way in which the Russians have adapted to war over the last 3.5 years, the way they have moved far ahead of the West in drone warfare, for example, where previously it was universally assumed that they were far behind. We're looking at a very formidable military system indeed, one which evolves and learns and adapts, and which has clearly the ability to draw on a very, very powerful science and industrial base, and which is absolutely a force to be reckoned with. So again, going back to what Kellogg said, I mean, he's talking nonsense. And the sooner we stop listening to people like him, the better for everyone it will be.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, between Kellogg and Rubio, Alex, you have people that were forced to listen to, and whose unfortunately their words hold policy weight. But your reaction, your assessment to Russia's actual capabilities versus these words of war, I should call them.
No, I'll just add on to what Alexander said. The Russian military is also a military that is built to defend its area, its country and its sphere. It's not made to be expansionist. It's not made to march all the way to Paris or to London or anything like that. It's not a bunch of aircraft carriers or anything like what the U.S. has to project power far away from the country. It's a military that is set up to defend and protect its borders and any threats to the country and to what it considers to be its sphere of influence. So that's the Russian military. That's what it's made to do, and it does it really well.
Yeah, and Alexander, I'm sure you were paying attention during the 80th anniversary that China held of its victory over Japanese aggression, where there was also a kind of similar panic in the mainstream media, U.S. and the West, talking about all of the advanced weapons, the Dhaiphong, intercontinental ballistic missile, all of this. And, people I've spoken to from China, close to China, they say, well, this was not a demonstration. It was almost exactly what Alex just said of our offensive capabilities. It's a demonstration of how we're not going to be treated like how we were 80 plus years ago ever again. And I'm guessing that Russia is in a similar kind of position, and that many Russians may feel the same about their own military capabilities. But given all of this, Alexander, given that comparison and just where things are in Ukraine, how do these military capabilities then actually reflect on the realities on the ground in Ukraine too? Because it's I think Alex brings up some really good points.
Well, indeed. I mean, can I just say he's absolutely right. Both and your point about China is absolutely spot on. If you look at the structure of both the Russian and the Chinese militaries, they are basically there to provide protection to the core, to the homeland, and also to project power close to the periphery, to the areas immediately adjoining the homeland. Neither country has ever sought to project power around the world, which is what the United States does. The United States has built its armed forces less to protect the continental United States, more to be able to project power in every place around the world 24/7. It's got its 11 aircraft carriers. It's got its massive numbers of military bases. It's got all of those things. Neither China nor Russia have either of those or aspire to. But when it comes to wars on their periphery, and this is what we're seeing in Ukraine, playing out in Ukraine now, the Russians can, over time, when they concentrate their resources, they can bring resources to play, which are ultimately overwhelming. And by contrast, when the United States and the West tries to project power into precisely this kind of area close to the Russian border, you very quickly see that they can't sustain it. So Ukraine is running out of weapons, it's running out of tanks, it's running out of shells, it's running out of artillery pieces. I've been told by somebody who's in a position to know that Ukraine has pulled nearly all of its guns now to the west bank of the Dnieper because it is so heavily outshelled east of the Dnieper against the Russian army now. It is unable to match the Russians in these sort of capabilities, and that is why the Russians are able to grind on, and why the Russians are winning. And this is also why, in the West, where one is getting the sense of increasing frustration, because everything has been thrown at this problem over the last 3.5 years. We talk about how our combined GDP is so much greater than the Russians' combined GDP, but we constantly find that in a struggle on the Russian periphery, we cannot match Russian military power. And that is ultimately what is playing out in Ukraine today.
Yeah, Alex, to you.
Yeah, what Alexander said is spot on. They keep on scratching their heads, wondering why they can't defeat Russia. We're the powerful West. We're the rich West, or we were the rich West. Now we're in debt. But they haven't figured it out that Russia plays to its strengths. That's what it does, and it understands its geography. And they misjudged, they misunderstood Russia's economy, the way Russia works, Russia's industrial capacity, the way it can manufacture weapons, its manufacturing output. They bought into the John McCain gas station masquerading as a country from 2004, 2005, whenever John McCain came up with that slogan. They bought into it back then, and it's become doctrine. It really has become doctrine. They base their policy on that statement from John McCain, and they base their policy going into Ukraine on that statement from John McCain, and they had and they're getting their asses handed to them. Bottom line.
Yeah, before moving on to the general world situation, how about, Alexander, if you could update us? It's not getting a lot of talk anymore between NATO with these kind of theatrical escalations around Russian drones and all of this. Not a lot of talk about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, and particularly in which direction this conflict is going and how rapidly. So, Alexander, help the audience out here.
What the Russians are doing, and it's what they do in every single war, is that they don't concentrate on one part of the front line. What they have done, what they always do, is that they attack everywhere all the time. And it continues to be a policy of attrition. Russian policy, Russian military doctrine is to use attrition to destroy the enemy's army. And through the destruction of the enemy's army, the enemy's ability to continue to fight, to make the enemy lose the will to fight. And that is basically what they're doing. So the Russians have advanced. They advanced in the south, in Zaporozhye region towards the river. They are fighting along this line of cities, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, Prakrovsk, this last big fortified barrier that the Ukrainians have in Donbass. If these cities fall, and if one falls, the others fall very quickly because they are all interconnected with each other in a single line of positions. If this line of defenses fall, then the Russians are able to advance basically unopposed or almost unopposed westwards, to the Dnieper River. If they reach the Dnieper River, the Ukrainian, the ability of Ukraine to continue the war starts to break down because the Dnieper is Ukraine's key transport artery. All its main cities, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, Kremenchuk, Kiev itself, are located on this river. If the Russians hold the East Bank, then the war basically ends. We are probably closer to that point than many people understand. And the word we're getting every day from Ukraine is that the Ukrainian army is becoming increasingly tired. It's increasingly short of men. It's having to shuffle its best brigades from one part of the front line to another to try to put out fires and to contain Russian breakthroughs. And these Russian breakthroughs are taking place in more and more places. Probably within the next few weeks, a number of towns, Kupiansk, Siversk, Liman in the north, will fall. The latest reports suggest that the situation in Pakrovsk itself, one of these cities, one of this line of cities, is very bad, and that the Ukrainians will probably be pushed out of there too. But one way or the other, however long it takes, this barrier will break. The lava flow, as apparently the Pentagon calls the advance of the Russian army, will surge through. And as I said, beyond it is the Dnieper. And once the Russians reach the Dnieper, effectively it's the end of the war.
Yeah, and with the end of the war, Alex, then what next for NATO? Your assessment of the battlefield situation and what would be next? Because I mean, we've heard threats on Kaliningrad and all this kind of bluster, but it speaks to a big kind of big problem for NATO and the United States. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it took the West 4 years to understand that Russia's fighting a war of attrition, right? They've been so concerned with territorial gains that they forgot that Russia's first and foremost looking to destroy the Ukraine military. Putin said it at the beginning of the SMO. He said demilitarization, right? So he said it way in the beginning. The West did not listen to anything that Putin was saying. They never do. And here we are. The Russians are grinding down the Ukraine military. They've also demilitarized much of the collective West, right? The collective West doesn't have any weapons to give, really. So what happens afterwards with NATO? NATO's gonna try to make the argument that they need more money, that they need more budget to protect from the oncoming Russian military. Now that the Russian military has won in Ukraine, Putin's going to set his sights on the Baltic states. He's going to set his sights on Poland and Romania and Paris and Amsterdam. And so we need to bump up our military spending in order to defend against the Russians marching westward. That's going to be NATO's play. But they need the United States. That's the key. And we don't know what Trump's going to do, if it's even possible for the United States to walk away from NATO, or at least to cut back from NATO. I don't think it's possible. I don't see that happening. But that's going to be NATO's angle when the conflict wraps up in whatever shape or form it ends up wrapping up with. And also don't discount the collective West looking at other regions to create certain troubles in. For example, Moldova. That could be a hot spot. They haven't given up on Georgia, right? So I mean, they're going to poke around and try to figure out something, but Ukraine was the big one. That was the war that was going to get the regime change in Moscow, and it was going to be fast. It was going to happen in 3 months with the sanctions. The government of Putin was going to fall, and it was going to be game over, and it didn't work out like that. So, we'll have to wait and see how all of this unfolds.
Yeah, and perhaps now we can move on to what's happening in another part of the world. Alexander, we have Israel. I mean, I don't know how many times we've heard this, is launching its ground occupation now of Gaza. It's horrific from what reports are saying in terms of the raising of Gaza, the effect on Palestinian civilians. But as this has been happening, there has been this ongoing saga and continuing saga around the Qatar strike that Israel launched, and questions about how much did the U.S. know, how much did Trump know. Donald Trump says the missiles were in the air. The Israeli jets were firing them across the Red Sea when they were called. Now, Axios is saying that Israeli officials or named Israeli officials are telling them that actually the communication happened a bit earlier. Unclear how much time actually they had. The Trump administration had to stop any such thing. But nonetheless, Alexander, this comes as Rubio just visited Israel, and you had even Netanyahu, and I can play that after your comments, almost like veiled threats in this like 50 states plus one theater to the U.S. delegation, which was massive, by the way. What do you make of this situation, Alexander? Is Israel going to finally succeed in ending this carnage that it has unleashed in the region? And how is Donald Trump pulled into, as the Ukraine conflict looks worse and worse and worse by the day? Is Donald Trump and his administration really pulled in and mired into West Asia, the Middle East, as this situation continues to ignite and explode?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the conflict in Gaza now has been also going on for years, and Israel has tried continuously ever since October 1993. Sorry, 2023. It's been trying to destroy Hamas. So it's going to try again to destroy Hamas. In the process, huge numbers of people are going to die. There's going to be much more destruction of buildings. There'll be wounded people. There'll be hungry people. There'll be more terrible pictures coming out of Gaza of what you accurately described as the carnage that is taking place there. And I myself cannot see why something that has not succeeded for so long. Bear in mind that Gaza is a very small place. I mean, we're talking about a relatively limited area where this fighting has been taking place. If Israel has not been able to pacify it, if it's not been able to uproot Hamas there in all that time, I can't myself see how this time is going to be any different and how it's going to succeed. And one would have thought that by now, with all the political pressure, with all the condemnation, with all the criticism that there has been, with the repeated failures of every single military campaign, with apparently conflicts between the political leaders in Israel and the military, one would have thought that the time had come for the government in Israel to try a different approach. But of course, they never do. And what we have instead is, even as this crisis in Gaza continues, we see attacks on Qatar, a friend and ally of the United States. Apparently, the Qataris feel very humiliated by this. There's talks with all the other Gulf states. They're apparently in shock that something like this has happened, because they'd assumed that the Americans would always ensure that there would never be an attack on Qatar or on one of them of this kind. Rubio has been rushed to the scene to try to persuade people in the Gulf states not to get too angry and panicky. Anyway, it all looks terrible. It looks diplomatically and politically terrible. I'm not even going to talk about the moral disaster that is playing out as well. And there doesn't seem to be any ability either in Israel to rethink this, or any will in Washington to stop it. And given that this is inevitably what is going on in Gaza, is affecting the reputation of the United States as well, and its geopolitical position and its position in the Middle East, one would have thought that the United States by now would also recognize that it has an interest in bringing all of this to a stop. But that, of course, is not what it's trying to do.
Yeah, Alex, your assessment of the situation, and maybe even comment on, Rubio's trip there was almost like an absolute embarrassment in terms of the optics, and then you throw in the whole Charlie Kirk assassination and murder, and it gets even more and more embarrassing.
Yeah, the optics, not good, but I don't think they're really caring too much about the optics. According to Axios, according to their sources, they claim that Rubio went to Israel, told Netanyahu that Trump is not going to stop the operation in any way, this Gaza City operation. Trump's not going to get in the way. Basically, he's saying that Trump is greenlighting this, and the only request from the Trump White House, according to Axios, is that this operation be quick. That's simple. That's the reason, according to their sources, why Rubio was in Israel. So Trump is fully on board. The Trump administration is fully on board, but they're hoping that this is going to be a quick operation to clear out Gaza, and then the Trump administration is thinking wrongly. This is wrong, but they're thinking they'll be able to move on to the next adventure, right? That's not what's going to happen. This is not ending. This is not going to end. But it's another bad foreign policy miscalculation, a horrific foreign policy miscalculation from the Trump White House. But that's it. They're greenlighting this thing, and they're telling Netanyahu, make it quick.
Yeah, and despite this, Alexander, because Alex, you're 100% right. This is being greenlit. But during this meeting, Alexander, Netanyahu had some choice words that many across social media are pondering about the meaning of, given the tone and the way it was relayed to the, as I said, massive U.S. delegation. It wasn't just Marco Rubio. It was many members of Congress. Here is Netanyahu's words.
I just said this in another meeting. They said, "Oh, Israel is isolated. Israel can't break out of the siege." I said, "We will." Some of them have stopped weapon component shipments. Can we get out of this? Yes, we can. We're pretty good at producing weapons. Like intelligence, we share both with the United States. A good chunk of your intel and our weapon systems, we share with the United States. We're tremendously appreciative of the bipartisan support in military matters to Israel in these years and today as well. But do you have cell phones? You have cell phones here? No? You're holding a piece of Israel right there. You know that? I mean, a lot of the cell phones, the medicines, the food.
So a lot of people were very curious about the cell phones remark, especially given what Israel has done with its cell phones, not only with surveillance, but what happened in Lebanon. Alexander, this tone, though, of Israel's talking about itself being under siege, given the declining, as you said, legitimacy and waning position that it has in the region and the world with regard to what it's doing in Gaza. What's your reaction to these kind of comments, and also Netanyahu's in Israel's overall situation? Because there's always a debate raging in the U.S. and the West over, okay, Israel is in full control, it's full steam ahead, it's doing whatever it wants, and then there's others who say, well, there seems to be quite a bit of desperation. The Qatar strike, the how that went down, what were the details, the behind the scenes, how that was decided, and also just the fact that, as you said, Gaza is many years in the making, and all you have are people's anger of what many are calling a genocide, even many UN bodies.
Well, a UN body has actually found that. But let's go to Prime Minister Netanyahu, because, of course, what he's been making statements about, yes, Israel might indeed be isolated, and in global affairs, he's talking about Israel having to embrace autarky. In other words, try to become a self-sufficient economy Israel having to cope with sanctions. The reality is, as he knows perfectly well, he started in politics as Israel's finance minister, and many people feel that he was a very successful finance minister. As he knows perfectly well, Israel hasn't had the means or the resources to conduct autarky, to be self-sufficient. This is an absurd idea. So what he's basically telling the Americans is, look, I may be talking about Israel being isolated. I may be talking about self-sufficiency for Israel. But you know, and I know, that this isn't possible. We ultimately depend on you. You must stick with us, therefore, because if we go down, be absolutely clear that in the Middle East, at least, and in many areas of technology also, you'd go down with us. So he's basically telling the Americans, stick with us, even as we embark on all of these wars and all of these operations, these incursions into Lebanon and Syria, these missile strikes on Qatar, these new offensives in Gaza. And of course, the other thing that Netanyahu and the Israelis always tell the Americans and their friends in the West is, stick with us because we're so good, we're so much better than the other side is, that we are certain to win. Just give us a little time, just bear with us a little more, and we will deliver you with victory. We will achieve regime change in Iran, we will destroy Hezbollah, we will destroy Hamas, we will do all of these things, and we will deliver you victory. All we need is for your support just a little longer, and we will give that to you. And the reality is that it never quite happens. I mean, we've had the war in Gaza has now gone on for years. Yes, it's absolutely correct. Alex is absolutely right. Axios does say that Netanyahu and the Israelis were told by the Americans, do it, but do it fast. The Israelis have been trying to do it for years. Why assume that this time they can do it fast? We saw the same with the strike against Iran back in June. The Americans clearly were led to think that, you know, if Israel conducted this attack on Iran, the government would collapse, the entire Iranian leadership would be eliminated, there would be an uprising, the regime would fall, change would happen, and it didn't happen. So we could see very obviously what Netanyahu is doing, and it's been what he's been doing for years. And the mystery to me is why people in the United States, the leadership in the United States, Donald Trump specifically, let themselves time and again be taken in by all this.
Yeah, to you, Alex, your assessment.
Yeah, Netanyahu's speech was just basically telling the Americans, the people in attendance, that we're in this together. Right, so that was his message. We're in this together, and we're going to reshape the Middle East together. We're going to create a greater Israel together. We're going to create a sphere of influence together, whatever you want to call it. That's his message. Mm-hmm. Israel and the United States, we're going to do what we need to do in the Middle East, and we're going to do it side by side. Don't you guys think of changing things up? Don't think that you're going to ever walk away from this. You know, we're in this for the long haul. That was Netanyahu's message.
Yeah, we're in this together, but also just a hint of, I mean, there was even some nervous laughter there when it came to the relationship and partnership early on.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's exactly right, Danny. We're in this together, right? Right, guys? Yeah, right. I mean, yeah.
Which is incredible in some ways. You know, Alexander, because we had right after this Qatar strike, Netanyahu said point blank that this is going to happen again and again and again, or could happen again and again and again. Here's what he said.
Applaud it. They should applaud Israel for standing and up to these same principles and carrying them out. And I say to Qatar and all nations who harbor terrorists, you either expel them or you bring them to justice. Because if you don't, we will.
So, more recently, that was directly after the strikes. There was a lot of backlash, understandably so, for that. Donald Trump said this recently during this time that Rubio was visiting Israel.
Said that he doesn't rule out targeting Hamas anywhere they are. You said that you don't want to see Qatar hit again. Are there any guarantees that Qatar?
Well, he won't be hitting in Qatar. As I say, I call it Qatar. You call it Qatar. You're actually more right, but actually you're allowed to go. The Emir said you can say it any way you want, but.
Okay. Alexander, what do you make of this? A lot of people talk about the U.S.-Israel relationship in so many ways. Here, I think, was a kind of a striking, no pun intended, example of why I think there's so much confusion about it. But what's your take on this?
Well, Donald Trump told the Emir of Qatar that his country would not be attacked again. Something like this will never happen again. And immediately the Israelis say, oh, yes, it will. If we judge that it's in our interests to do it, if these people are still there, Hamas people are still in Qatar, where they were, by the way, with the agreement of the United States, and where the United States was negotiating with them. Anyway, then we will attack again. So what that communicates to the Emir of Qatar is that if the president of the United States tells him that Israel won't attack his country, then the president of the United States does not have the ability to control Israel, because the Israelis are saying something completely different. So the Emir of Qatar at this point knows that he cannot trust what is being said to him by the president of the United States. And inevitably, he's going to draw his own conclusions. He's going to start looking for new friends, and the Middle East is full of stories about this. He's not going to break links with the United States. Of course not. It's not in his interests to, but he's going to start to hedge. He's going to start to buy weapons from other countries. He's going to work with closer relations with those countries as well. We know which countries those are, China and Russia. He's going to deepen all those relationships, and so are all the other Gulf states going to do. Now, as to which side is dominant in this relationship, Israel or the United States? Well, this is always a complicated story. I have always myself believed that if the United States really wanted to control the situation in the Middle East, then it's absurd to think that Israel, a small country, can stand up to the United States. The reason that Israel has this extraordinary level of impunity as to what it does, its ability to do these things, is because, of course, there are an awful lot of people in the United States who share its objectives in the Middle East. They too want to see the Middle East restructured and reorganized in a way that they think suits not just Israeli, but also American interests. And these people are very powerful, and it is very difficult for any American president to go back against them, even if, in the case of Donald Trump, the president has that inclination. And I doubt that Trump does.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people miss this point where, especially the neocons, if you look at neocons and what Israeli officials say about the region, it's almost nearly identical, if not 100% identical. Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's the Wesley Clark. What was it? 7 countries in X amount of years. I mean,
5 years.
They've worked through the list, right? I believe Iran's the only one that has not been checked off. But yeah, Alexander's right. If Qatar doesn't get it by now, then they're never gonna understand what the U.S. game is. Well, what the foreign policy is, at least under this administration. It's a trickery foreign policy. I mean, this is now a pattern. This is how the Trump administration, at least with smaller countries, or countries that it does not consider to be great powers. It uses this type of policy where they get into some sort of negotiation, they get into some sort of talks. Witkoff travels back and forth. They then get the country to drop its guard, and then something happens, some sort of attack or some sort of strike or some sort of bombing or whatever. This is now a pattern. This is now, part of Trump's foreign policy strategy and his tactics. So if Qatar is smart about it, what Alexander says is correct. They're not going to cut off the United States or burn their bridges with the United States just like that. They're going to start to hedge, and they're going to start to look a little bit towards China, a little bit towards Russia, and slowly start to move away as best they can. And every country in the region is going to probably do the same. But it's a complicated region, and you always gotta remember that the strike against Qatar, it traveled over Jordan, it traveled over Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
What exactly was going on with those countries? So there's a lot of U.S. bases all over the Middle East. In all of those countries, you pretty much have a U.S. military presence. So it's a complicated region, a complicated area, and it's hard to know exactly who was in the know when the strike happened. As far as the Middle East countries, one thing's for certain: that the Trump White House knew about this,
No.
and obviously Israel. They kept the Trump White House informed about what was going on, if not greenlit by the Trump White House to attack Qatar. I mean, I don't buy the narrative that Trump knew nothing about this. So, the question that I have with everything that's going on in Qatar is exactly which countries in the Middle East knew about this as well.
Yeah, and then finally, maybe final question to both of you: your impressions of U.S. foreign policy at this time, because as we've been talking about the Qatar strike and what's going on in Gaza. I mean, you have the horrors in Gaza, and then you have negotiators literally being unsafe from Israeli attack in Qatar, a presumed U.S. ally, if the U.S. has any such a thing. But then you also have Donald Trump's administration now setting its sights on Venezuela, multiple now. He says 2, 3 of these so-called drug boats. We have no idea what they actually are. We just have footage, a couple of videos of the U.S. Air Force striking these boats. But, Marco Rubio, even Donald Trump, they're talking very tough when it comes to Venezuela, moving Marines close to Venezuela's territory. But your impressions, Alexander, of U.S. foreign policy at this time, because on the one hand, there's almost a kind of stagnation. I can't even call it a retrenchment with Ukraine, but in other areas, it seems like things are getting worse. And I guess I'm curious about what your take is on why that is and how that is going about.
Well, what I get the sense of is increasing chaos and incoherence concealed by constant belligerence wherever the United States, or at least wherever this administration feels that it can actually, get away with that belligerence. So there's been sort of ideas that the US is looking at establishing a sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere. There's said to be a report by Elbridge Colby from the Pentagon saying that this needs to be now the US priority. But then, even as that happens, we see the United States getting involved in a conflict in the Middle East. We see the United States trying to discuss things with the Russians, and at the same time, it's trying to increase pressure on India, and then it gets angered when India pushes back, and all of these things. I don't myself see here a clear structure to US foreign policy at the moment. I get the sense that at some level, some people in Washington do now understand that the unipolar moment has ended, that multipolarity has come, that the United States must now work within an international system in which there are several great powers rather than just one, but that they find this conceptually and emotionally impossible to do. And so they're hitting out in all kinds of directions in order to persuade themselves that despite this great change that is obviously happening, they are still strong. And the result is that we get all of this turbulence, all of these extraordinary events taking place in place after place. And can I just say, I completely agree with Alex. I don't believe the strike on Qatar, that the United States didn't know that it was happening. How is that possible? Put aside the fact that the United States has bases and radar stations right across the Middle East. The Israeli military and the US military are like this. I mean, they're every single, station, office, whatever it is in Israel, there will be Americans there. So it is impossible that the Israelis could pull off a thing like this without the Americans knowing about it. I mean, any idea that it could be done without the Americans being informed is absurd. And just as Alex said, this is a cover story that we're hearing. They lured the Hamas people where they were, where they thought they were. They launched the attack. If the attack had been successful, the Americans would have taken credit. Because it wasn't successful, they'll say, oh, we didn't know, it was nothing to do with us. They send Rubio to pacify the Emir of Qatar. But it's these kind of games that US foreign policy is now reduced to. And it's a symptom of retreat and decline, but it is also creating enormous instability in the international system.
Yeah. And when Netanyahu earlier in the video I played said, we share all intel, that's not a phone call. That's not like, there are US intel is in Israel, working side by side with Israeli intel, Mossad, etc. Alex, your final thoughts here.
Yeah, the U.S. foreign policy to me is at the moment under Trump is chaotic. It's absolutely chaotic. It's the Trump administration which does not accept the fact that we are in a multipolar world, even though they know that we are in a multipolar world. They just can't seem to accept it, and so you have to go by the peace through strength mantra, right? And you have to continue to say that you are the most powerful, you are the hegemon, you are the unipolar power, even though they understand that it is a multipolar world and a multipolar system that we're working towards, that we've already arrived at. And I think the SCO meeting in China and everything that followed after that, including the parade, kind of sealed the deal as far as where the world is. It's in a multipolar moment. The U.S. just can't come to grips with that. No. And I think we shouldn't, when you look at Ukraine, when you lump Ukraine into everything that's happening right now, all the various conflicts, I think Ukraine is an outlier. Mm-hmm. The Trump administration, for the first 6 months, they followed Keith Kellogg's advice, and they wanted to defeat Russia. That was the policy that he took, was to defeat Russia. And that's what he tried to do for the first 6 months, first 5-6 months. Eventually, he started to understand that it's not working, that it's not going to happen. We're not going to defeat Russia, and so you ended up with the negotiations in Alaska and some dialogue and stuff like that. But Ukraine is the exception, not the rule. The rule right now is trickery. It's side by side with Israel. Maybe a sphere of influence in the Middle East, maybe a sphere of influence in the Americas, and to try and hold on to the unipolar moment as long as they can, or to try and prevent the multipolar moment from continuing to strengthen.
Well, I think it's a great place to conclude here. I want to thank you both. Just going to throw up the super chats here while I tell everybody. I want to thank everyone who gave a super chat first off. I want to let everyone know that you can find Alexander Mercouris and Alex Christoforou's YouTube channels in the video description below. You can also find the Duran YouTube channel in the video description below. Is there anything else you'd like to promote, or if there's anything I'm missing?
Well, it is. I think Alex is absolutely right. We're in a transition period, and the peace through strength mantra, of course, it's not delivering peace; it's delivering war instead. It's delivering violence and instability instead. So, I mean, ditch it as quickly as possible. That's the one advice I'd give them.
Yes. Also, everyone, I want to thank the moderators, of course. I want to also point everyone to the video description, not only to find Alex and Alexander's work, but also the places to support this channel, Substack, Patreon, and much more. Tomorrow I'll be on with Alistair Crook and a few other guests too. But until then, everyone, I'll promote that 11 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow, September 17th. Thank Alex and Alexander for spending so much time here. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll head out together. Take care and good night, everyone.